I want to introduce Dr. Hitesh Changlani from physics and Viet Tung Hoang from computer science. Thank you both for being here. Hitesh, why don't we start with you? If you would please introduce yourself, letting everyone know your name, your department, when you received your career award, and from what directorate.
Okay, great. So hello everyone. I'm Hitesh Changlani. I am an assistant professor in the physics department. I joined in 2018. And the year I was successful, I applied in August 2020, and I heard back in January 2021. And my funding officially started in May 2021. What was the other question? What else am I supposed to say?
What directorate?
What directorate? Yeah, so I am under NSF DMR. So I am a condensed matter theorist. I do condensed matter theory, which is material science. So that's the directorate, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And NSF DMR, yeah.
So you didn't apply the first year you came here, but the second year you came
here? Yeah, I didn't. My first try was, this was my second try. Okay. My first try was in 2019, which was rejected. And my second try was in 2020, and I arrived in 2018. So yes, I came in July 2018 to FSU, or August 2018 to FSU. So I did not apply that year, but I did apply in 2019, and then I applied in 2020, and the 2020 try was successful. Yes.
I was wondering, Dr. Hoang, if you could tell us your department when you received your career award and from what directorate.
I am in the Department of Computer Science, and I apply in the SASE program, which is typically for the cybersecurity one. I applied in FSU at 2016, and I applied in 2020. And then that is my first attempt, and I got that.
Great. You got it in your first attempt. My second question, Hitesh, I'm going to ask you this is, what did you learn from your first attempt to your second attempt? What changed?
I learned a lot. I learned how not to write a proposal. No, well, okay. In all honesty, my first attempt was reviewed fairly well, except for one referee. So I had 5 referee reports, but even the ones that were like, oh, it's excellent, did give me pretty good criticism for what could be improved. And then I think the thing that helped me the most, to be honest, was taking those criticisms in my stride and not being like, oh, okay, it's just some referees annoyed with me. And the second thing that helped me is that Beth organized this mock sort of panel review, and the 3 reviewers were all from FSU, and they had a whole history of funding and so on. So they knew what works, what doesn't work, and they were extremely brutally honest. They were like, this is not working, this is working, this needs to be improved, this doesn't, this is okay, this is passable. So for me, looking at the reviews critically, like, not getting too emotionally this charged up, or, okay, how can this be? Even though, I had pretty good grades for most of it, except for one reviewer. So I think that this kind of criticism definitely helped me. And then also, for me, also reorganizing how I wrote certain things helped me a lot. So yeah, I would say these are the 2 things that, having this mock session really helped me quite a bit. That was conducted by your office.
Yeah. And I appreciate you actually mentioning it can be a little hard sometimes to get brutal honesty from your peers. Sure. But, wouldn't you rather get that before you get it from reviewers?
I agree. I completely agree. And in fact, they ask you to switch off your video when they're reviewing so that you don't see your expression, right? So then they can be really brutally honest. And I think that's important. I think a lot of people maybe have a harder time accepting that, okay, there's some limitation that caused this. So I think all in all, you just have to be open-minded about how are others perceiving what you're doing.
And Tung, during your application process, what was the most helpful things for you as you went through your application?
So for my application, I got help from a couple of places. So there are a few people in my area who are willing to actually upload their NSF, their career application online publicly. Yeah, so you learn from an example, especially a winning example, and then the guy that I learned from, he actually documented his application with some reasoning why he believes that it is the strategy for winning that one. So one thing that I remember is that he argues that you should delay applying for the career as much as you can. It's something that very counterintuitive. Typically, people advise you that, hey, you have 3 chances, apply early so that you can learn from your mistake and so on. But number one, the career is not a typical grant. It's not a regular NSF grant that you apply. It somehow they would judge you based on your reputation and your prior success to see how likely you would become a great scholar and so on. So you want to build some sort of career there, and it takes time. If you would hastily apply for the career, maybe in your 2nd year or so, then sometimes you actually get that. But I'm afraid that most of the time you would lose because it's so early to get such a reputation in your field. Unless you are a superstar, and that's a different story. So I spent 3 years doing postdoc, and I wait until my 4th year. So actually I have 7 years under my belt when I apply for a career. And I believe that is one reason that I got it in my first attempt. The second,
I actually tend to agree with you. If I can just add something, Beth, I tend to agree with you. I did a couple of postdocs. So I did postdoc for 5 years, and then, so if you just accumulate that time and the time, that I spent at FSU before applying, and that's roughly consistent with what Dr. Hoang is saying, that it's roughly the 6-7 year mark, that where you just feel like you're a mature researcher who's taken seriously by the community and so on. But I tend to agree with that.
So
even though technically I applied earlier, like I applied earlier than he did. You came in 2016, correct? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I applied. Yeah. So I arrived in 2018, but we got it in the same year. But if you just count the number of years, it's similar, I think.
Yeah. So it takes some amount of time so that you can accumulate your experience or whatever, so that you can easily show that to the panel. So of course, the year depends on the area you are in. In my area, 3-year postdoc is a little bit long. Some people got a faculty job right out the grad school. Some had to do 1 or 2 years. That's what I wish I could have done, but I had to wait until my 3rd year and so. Yes, I know that in some other field like biology or chemistry, you have to do more years on postdoc one. So how many years you have to spend depends on your specific area. Yeah. So that is one thing that I learned. Another one, another source of help I got is from a colleague in my department. He once served as an NSF director. So he has a lot of sort of insider information. So he was willing to go through my proposal and explain to me how to improve that. Yeah, of course, he doesn't work in my specific subfield. So, but typically the career panel doesn't consist of specialists in your area. So they may consist of a little bit outside, and so you have to write your proposal with an aim for a broader audience in mind. And as I got some help from my advisor, who of course works in my subfield and who has a lot of knowledge about the career awards because he served in various panels from that one. So that would be the sources of help that I learned from.
Well, I'm going to ask just one more question, and then I'm going to open it up for people here that I'm sure will have questions. What do you think is an advantage for applying and getting a career award? Like, why did you decide to go for career award?
You want to go first?
Yeah. So the career award is actually here is considered a prestigious award. It shows that you are a good scholar and so on. And for example, in FSU, you know that, I'm not sure if you know that you would get a raise if you get a career award. You get $5,000 more per year. So, and I think that actually quite a proposal, it actually forced me to think more about my career than I used to. So I have to think that how would I become a better scholar, and not just in terms of research. There are some, you know, that the career is a little bit more on some other services like teaching or so on. So normally I'm not kind of a service person, but because I have to apply for the career, so it forced me to think more about that. I actually went to this NSF career panel back in 2017 in my first year here. But I spent actually 3 years thinking about that, what I would write in the service part of the career. It's not really what I would like to think about the service part. I would prefer to think more about my research. But yeah, I actually spent that amount of time honing my service part of my teaching or something else. So my teaching is, the part in my service part is to create a very original course that I spend a lot of time thinking about and actually implement in part in the courses that I taught. It took me lots of time doing that. And I think that a reason that I got the career is because of that section. Everybody that I showed that part really liked that. That ranged from the colleague in my department or my advisor or the actual NSF panel. And so based on the score, I was only competitive, not highly competitive. So it's at a boundary, depending on the will of the director, you can either get it or not. But I think because of my service part, I got the career award.
Right. Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to that if I can. Yeah, so the NSF CAREER is a 5-year award. And at least in my field, the usual NSF grants are for only 3 years. And I do agree with Dr. Hoang that you kind of have to think of research as sort of a long-term thing. So, career is a sort of springboard for, further, research and they really are looking at developing or looking into you as being a scholar rather than, oh, he solved, one problem in 3 years or whatever, So I think you have to have that longer term vision. I think that has to come across as well in your writing that, okay, yes, you are being funded for 5 years, sure, but this grant may be continued on, right? And I have several examples in my field where I see that, oh, the title looks the same. Well, they had a career on something. And 10 years later, 15 years later, they're doing the same thing because sometimes you might propose a lot, but it cannot just be accomplished in 5 years. So you have to have a longer term vision. And I think the career, the program managers and so on are looking at that. Like, is this individual going to be someone who's going to leave some mark in his field, in his or her field? And I think that's an important aspect of in their field, yeah. So. Yeah, so but I agree with everything else he said as well.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to open it up for questions if anybody has questions.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about how your budget for this proposal looked different than what it does, or was it different compared to a normal like NSF program? In other words, do you request students? Somebody initially earlier had asked about like maybe funding for a postdoc, but suggested maybe there's not enough money in there for that. But can you talk about any kind of differences in how you budget or what kind of things you requested? A
rather strange situation because it's not easy for me to recruit students. Honestly, I couldn't spend entirely my startup grants at FSU. I had to return some portion of that. In my proposal, I didn't ask for a postdoc. Typically, you have to write another section to explain what your mentoring plan is if you plan to add postdoc. But I think that if later you change your mind, you actually can contact the director and then update that. I think that's what happened when I applied for a postdoc at Santa Barbara. So the professor there didn't have a postdoc plan in his grants, but he somehow updated that. And so that's why he accepted me as a postdoc. And the budget for a postdoc, I think it's probably the same for students, because for postdocs you don't pay for the tuition. And so it doesn't affect much. You probably have to restructure your budget a little bit, but at least in my situation, it's not a big deal. So there was no difference for me for the budget parts.
Yeah, but I think Josh, if I'm correct, yeah, I think you have an important point. You can only do one or the other. You cannot do both. So in my case, I was slightly lucky because Magnet Lab, the Mag Lab, I'm affiliated with that as well. They have a group theory postdoc position. So I had the advantage that I could, work with postdoc and as it was a group postdoc, and that funding comes from the Mag Lab. But look, I mean, you have to decide one or the other. The amount is not that much that you can support both, and yeah, the amounts may be comparable, as he said, because you're not paying the postdoc tuition fee. But typical career grants are around $100,000 a year. Like my amount, you can look it up online, is $547,299. So is that close to $100,000 a year? And that can only do one or the other. And so, my philosophy was, look, I need to show enough preliminary results to get a grant, right? I mean, I went like all out. So why don't I use part of my startup to fund, someone for a postdoc? And so I actually did that. I spent 1 year of my, 1 year of a postdoc salary was paid on my startup. And so as a result of that, postdocs are trained and so on. So I could get more preliminary results. So you have to be you have to think about it strategically. But it's true that on the career grant, you can only support one or the other. It will never be both, or so even 2 graduate students would be impossible. You have only money for one.
Yeah, it sounds like, you get a grant for, say, $450,000 and you think, wow, that sounds like a lot, but that's over 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So 5 years, exactly.
I'll ask a question. If you had only one piece of advice to give for people who are applying, what would you, or thinking of applying, what would you advise?
Yeah, I mean, if you have one piece of advice, yeah, I think if you should have a compelling story and compelling thing to say. You should not just apply for, okay, I have nothing else to do and I need 10 years, so I need to apply. You need to have a compelling reason, a compelling story, something you want to really accomplish. And that should reflect in your writing. I think both of them are important. You just paste a bunch of results and not really have a story. That also doesn't sound so exciting because I can assure you, all the reviewers read my story or read the proposal very carefully. They found things, some very, very pointed things. So think about, as Dr. Hoang was also saying, that it took him 3 years, right, to think about the story and the service and so on. You have to have a vision of what do you see yourself in, n number of years. And I think that takes the longest time because you're constantly thinking about, okay, how am I, and added to that, you will be doing things like teaching and other committee service. And also you really have to set some time aside for that. It's not just like, okay, I have fancy result ABC. Well, but where are you headed? That sort of thing takes some more time. And so that is the number one thing I would ask, our assistant professors to focus on, like have a cohesive sort of flow and story for what do you want to accomplish. That is very important. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Tung?
Yeah, so actually, I think that my advice can the same one. So basically, the career requires some strong, ambitious plan. So and that you're not likely get that easily. So every summer, I spend some time thinking about the career grant, and I had to postpone that because I see that as my current ideas was not strong enough. And if I don't fully convinced about the certainty that it wins, that I would never apply. So it took me a couple of years to accumulate enough ideas to write a strong proposal. And actually, I spent 2 months during the summer to write that proposal, and I had to work down very carefully on the details of the ideas and so on. And that in that way, I would convince myself that okay, it is a good proposal, and it has a reasonable chance of success. So the career proposal is not something that you would treat lightly. It requires some story and very strong ideas, and you would need to take some time for it to be mature. Yeah, not something that you write in a single year. So yeah, I know a couple of people who would quickly submit a career proposal to get it rejected, and then the next year you would apply that, and then again and again. Yeah, that's not what I want. Yeah, I would prefer to make it slow so that I can have better ideas. So that's why I think that I got that in the first shot. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so I want to say one or two more specific things just to add to his points. Is that one is that they look at a lot of, is there a synergy between your outreach component and your actual content, the research component? So I think that achieving that synergy also takes a lot of thought, and you want to do something. Like for me, for example, I'm a computational physicist, right? So I proposed I want to introduce certain kinds of computational methods that will be taught in even a regular graduate course, right? So the first year graduate course. So that, and then the ideas for developing a computational physics book and so on. I think these kind of things were like just very well meshed or very well integrated with what I was doing in my research, what I am doing in my research. I think that also, like that's an important component. And the second thing is, like, use the resources you have at FSU to sort of carve a niche for yourself. For example, I work on magnetism in material systems and so on, and so that looks very good because I'm associated with the mag lab. It's not like I'm at the mag lab and I'm this outlier doing something else, which is so I'm showing that I'm actually collaborating with people. I'm actually talking to people, and I'm part of a broader community. I think that sort of thing also helps. So try to use the resources you have at FSU, and that can also help you with your vision for where do you see, how do you see yourself as part of the FSU community. I think this kind of thing actually comes out in your writing, and otherwise you're like, okay, you're disconnected from everything else and you're doing something very specific, which maybe is not representative or as representative of where your department is headed. Then even the letter your chair writes, so the letter that the chair wrote, so you have to, I don't know if everyone knows this, but your department chair has to write a letter for you, right? A 2-page letter saying, oh, this person is doing awesome things and so on. I think, yeah, I mean, that letter itself will be more effective if you can really see how do you belong to this community, how do you belong to this department. I'm not saying that you completely change your research plans and start doing something that you have never done, but just think of how you fit into the grander scheme of things, and that should help a lot. Okay, yeah.
Those are wonderful tips. Wonderful tips. I'm going to ask one last question, and I think we may be done. We talked a lot before you came on about what people chose as their outreach. How they we talked about working with schools or with the Challenger Center or different things. Roxanne was here from the Mag Lab and talked about different ways people connected through there. And I was curious if you could share, what was your broader impacts?
In my broader impact part, I plan to create a very original problem-solving course. So my goal is very ambitious. I the impact of that is not limited to my course, but that may help students to actually know how to solve problem. Right now, they just take a class and just have their knowledge presented to them, and that's all. They never learn actually. And this is especially bad in theoretical courses that I taught. So I get inspiration from the famous book, How to Solve It by George Bolia. And that's the book that inspired me when I was a kid, and that actually opened a lot of doors for me to learn that how to do maths and so on. So I want to do something similar for computer science, and the impact of that, if I can succeed, it would be a lot, not just for the students here, but for the society and so on. And I also describe a couple of activities, several activities that I can do for FSU. For example, I can try to improve the Young Scholar Program. That is basically a program of talented high school kids. They come here to take a couple of courses. There's a problem solving course here for them to take, but I look at that and I think I don't like that much. And that's one thing I can improve. Yes, and I also mentioned that I can work with an office here at FSU to actually have a longitudinal study on the effect of my course on the students who took it to see how good it is. So I'm serious on that, and not just that, okay, I offer a course, but I want to measure the quality of that in a meaningful way. So that's what I wrote in the proposal. So by the way, I think that you don't want to do a lot of activities there. The career panel knows that a lot of people try to do lip service by listing, say, a laundry list of activities that it would be impossible to complete. Or if you can do that, that will be doing it in a very superficial way. You want to list, you want to have a team, for example, here I have a central activity and a couple of supporting one that it is realistic to finish that. And actually, I am not a service person, but I'm generally interested in my activities. So that's why I believe that it has it convinces the panel to fund me. You should be passionate on the service that you intend to do also.
I completely agree with everything that Dr. Hoang said. But I just want to add one more thing that maybe this was brought up by Beth and the others, but FSU basically conducted, well, I won't say workshop, but sort of an interaction session with some people at local high schools, well, not really local, not in Tallahassee, but even in nearby counties. And actually just listening to the speeches or listening to the, what they had to say gave me a broader perspective of, okay, what does the community need from us, and how could we contribute? So keep your eyes and ears out for, okay, you might have a vision of, oh, this is what I can give to the community, but does the community want that from you? That's an important aspect. Another important thing was that, look, when I was writing my first proposal, that was in 2019, there was no COVID, right? So I had some vision of what would happen. And now, so whatever activity you do, just make sure that you can do some fraction of it over Zoom. And okay, maybe we'll go back to normal pretty soon, but all I'm saying is try to keep that in mind when designing things, when planning things. So for right now, I mean, I have a student, my graduate student, he goes to class over Zoom for a school in Panama City. So this school was basically, or this area was basically suffered a lot during Hurricane Michael. So, and then COVID happened. All the worst calamities basically happened. And so then these students, they kind of are not quite there, and they need a lot of help. And so sort of that, if you tell the NSF program officer that you're doing something in an area where they need us the most, and fortunately now we can do it over Zoom, I think that helps. And also one thing, I mean, this is something that I underestimated, maintain an active website, maintain an active, and have a reasonable online presence. That doesn't mean that you just go to Twitter and post whatever you want, but have a reasonable online presence, because I was contacted by some high school student from this place called Kissimmee, Florida. I didn't even know this place. I'm not a Floridian by birth. I've always lived in the northern part of the US. So I was like, oh, who is this high school? Is this genuine? And then I was like, I called a few phone numbers, and then I found, yeah, actually the student went through my website and has read all sorts of literature on quantum mechanics. And I was like, high school student knows all this? How is this possible? But it was genuine. And now she and I basically talk over Zoom on a regular basis. So even though it was not part of my plans really, but I could devote an hour a week, talking to someone like that. So sometimes the outreach, you have to go out to the community and do things, but sometimes the community will come to you if you are, fairly active and, visible, right? You also need to be visible. And so the community can tell you what do they really want from you, and that can actually help a lot. So I just wanted to add these couple of points in addition to what Dr. Hoang already said. Yeah.
Well, and I never even considered that until you said it, but, maybe having a plan B with education plans, like if we were forced to go virtual, this could be done by X, is something that people may want to consider in the future, because we never thought about these things, like how might you still do your work if you can't.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, in some way, actually, it has helped the outreach, because I'm talking to people who I would not talk to if I was just doing everything in person. So,
well, I want to thank you both so much for coming, sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. I know people appreciate it very much. And
thank you, Beth. Thank you for having us, and thank you for all your help. Actually, that helped us get to this stage. So, thank you. Yes.
Oh, great.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.